Hi, I'm John DeDakis, and you're one to one with me. And I'm one to one with my friend Brad Harper. There he is. How are you, Brad?
I'm just great, John. Thank you so much for having me today.
You're welcome. Let me just tell everybody a little bit about you. Brad Harper is a medical doctor and a retired Army pathologist. He served over 37 years in the Army, first as an airborne infantry platoon leader and later as the Deputy Assistant Surgeon General for the U.S. Army and the Pentagon. While serving as the command surgeon for the U.S. Army South, he spent time in Colombia and he had $1.5 million bounty on his head. We'll talk
Offered,
about that.
valid.
Invalid now. He's conducted over 200 autopsies, several of them forensic in nature, and he uses his clinical experiences to inform his writing. Speaking of which, and which is why we're talking to him today, his most recent novel, Queen's Gambit, won Killer Nashville's Silver Falchion Award for Best Suspense Novel, plus the Killer Nashville Award for the Best Book of the Year. And for the past 7 years, Brad and his wife, Chere, have worked at the theme park Busch Gardens in Williamsburg. Brad is Santa Claus and Chere is Mrs. Claus, and Chere will be joining us as well. So welcome, Brad, and congratulations.
Thank you very much. I knew as it was entered into the suspense category, would have made a finalist. I was hopeful. My first book won in the mystery category last year, so I had my fingers crossed. And when it came out, they announced the winners last night. I'm scrolling down, got to the suspense category. Oh, I won! That is awesome. So I went on Facebook, was about to type something, and someone said, "Oh, congratulations on winning best book." And I said, "Excuse me?" And I had to jump back to the announcement and scroll down to the bottom and said, "Oh, wow, that was totally unexpected."
Well, and do you have copies of the books there to hold up
Well,
so people can see the covers?
funny you should ask.
Yeah, exactly.
This is
Okay, that's A Knife in the Fog. That's
right.
your first
Yeah,
novel.
my debut novel. On this one, I have Arthur Conan Doyle join the hunt for Jack the Ripper, and the book we were just talking about, Queen's Gambit, came out September of last year, and that was the one that just won the suspense and the best book award. So I'm quite pleased, obviously, and still kind of trying to digest what that means, but enjoying the ride. John,
Well,
in case you don't know, John and I, we met some years back. What, about 6 years ago?
it must have been about that. It was at Antmology, I think, which was a real funky coffee shop in Nashville where
Yeah.
I taught a class on how to write a novel, and you were one of my students.
I had this idea for a book, and I'd written a lot of poetry in the early years, but never anything the size of a novel. And so John saw something in my early scribblings and coached me along. And finally, I got an agent and a 2-book deal, and wow, here I am. But John, you're a huge part of that success, and I'll be forever
Thank you.
grateful that we crossed paths when we did. They say when the student is ready, the master will appear.
Well, here's the thing that I want to discuss as well, because you've told me that you were really discouraged with the writing process and that you were really thinking of giving it up. And the thing I find astounding is that you felt that way about yourself because your writing is so good. And so help me understand and really help a lot of budding writers understand that mindset. What is it about the creative process that can make someone who's obviously as good as you are feel that you're not good? What's going on there? What's the dynamic there? You're a doctor. Tell me.
Well, was always a real bookworm, and so I think through my childhood, when I graduated high school, I walked across the stadium to get my diploma. They announced that in the 50-year history of my high school, no one had ever checked out as many books as I had, and that didn't count all the books I read at lunchtime that I never bothered to check out. So I always had my nose at a book, and so I was frustrated that this beautiful prose I had in my head wasn't realizing itself on the screen as I pounded away on that keyboard. It didn't have the structure. It didn't have the nice tight knit prose. I had Arthur Conan Doyle whispered in my ear, and yet I had Barney Fife typing on the keyboard.
So talk also about the value of feedback, because writing is such a solitary experience, and often writers, at least in my experience, are to a certain extent introverted or maybe shy. So the idea of sharing their stuff with someone else is a really daunting experience. So was it like that for you? What was the experience like getting someone else to look at your stuff and give you feedback? Was that terrifying or encouraging? How would you describe that?
Well, early on it was, because I was so critical of myself that I didn't expect anyone else to like it at all. So when I first opened up and started sharing, I felt like, the only way I'm going to get better is if someone who knows more than I do about the process can give me, some hints, give me some guidance. But over time, I've developed a really thick skin. And one day I was thinking, if you look at an English dictionary, something like 3,000 words in there were invented by Shakespeare. I didn't invent a one of them. I don't own any of those words. I'm just borrowing them, arranging them for effect. And if someone, like a flower arranger, if you will. So if someone who has some experience that I don't have, some knowledge that I don't have, and can show me how to do it better, I'd be foolish not to at least listen to them. Now, at the end of the day, it's still your work. It's your use of the words. One of the writers I greatly respect is Neil Gaiman. And Neil Gaiman says if someone reads something you wrote and says a particular scene doesn't work, he said they're almost always right. If they tell you why it doesn't work and how to fix it, they're almost always wrong. So at the end of the day, it's still on you to figure out how to make it better. But if I was only writing for myself, then it wouldn't matter. But if I want someone else to give me some money for my words, then I'd be foolish not to listen to someone with a different perspective, especially because I write, my protagonist is a woman, and the bulk of readers in America, both book purchasers and readers, are women. So I'd be foolish not to get women who I see as my ideal readers to look at what I've written and say, what do you think? Does this work for you? One of my readers gave me beta readers gave me a great insight that she said, women may have a strong emotional attachment to their man by a certain smell. And I know that smell is one of the most primitive senses of the five. It goes right to the base of the brain where our emotions are tied. And so I added in a couple of scenes where my protagonist is with this man that she has a romantic interest in, and she comments about the smell of his cologne, which is sandalwood, and the boot polish. And I thought that combination would create a very signature event signature, I guess, in the brain that people could immediately relate to and bring them into that scene and make it more realistic to them.
And that's what you found, that people did respond to that?
Yes.
Did you consciously, I write as a woman as well, and so I'm often asked, why do you write as a woman, and what, was that conscious, and is it hard to do? And so I'll ask that question to you.
Well, I don't think so. Growing up, I seem to have more female friends than male friends. I'm not a huge sports nut. I don't drive a muscle car. I never played football. I was a swimmer. I read a lot. I read poetry. I wrote poetry. So in general, I find that I think women are better observers of other people than men are. We all kind of have a little tunnel vision. We look straight ahead. And women, I think, have a broader view, broader perspective of things. They have to be able to negotiate in society, or navigate in society, better than men do, and negotiate. And so as a consequence, I think they're more observant. And so I've always find them more interesting to talk to in general. There are the occasional guy like you that's really interesting, but in general, I think women make better conversationalists.
I totally agree. And there was a guy who took one of my writing classes in the DC area, and I admire his courage and his honesty because he said, in front of a mixed class, he said, I do not understand women, therefore I don't write them as characters. And yeah, I mean, I'm kind of stunned as well. And you kind of think, well, geez, you write kind of boring books because to me, women are fascinating. And by not including any women in your stories, you're really limiting your reader's experience. So I think you and I are on the same page there.
So I guess this guy wrote military histories.
Yeah, I think so. Probably a lot of war stories, but now even war stories, women can be involved there as well. In fact, before we talk more about your books, let's go back because obviously your beard is not military. It's not. You'd have to drop and give me 20 there, Troop, if we were still in the service.
Because yeah.
And so, was this a reaction to all of the Strack stuff that was involved in the military? You just kind of let it go after you got out?
Oh, definitely. I took 1 week of terminal leave. We went to Ireland to walk the Wicklow Way south of Dublin. And my last day at work was the last day that I shaved. And I do the cheekbones and I do the neck, but as far as the rest of it, no. I quit shaving because I can, and why not?
And so then, did that naturally then lead to the Santa Claus gig? I mean, how did that come about?
Oh, I had no idea, no intention, whatever, of being Santa Claus. Mrs. Claus, I have to blame her for that.
Well, she's going to join us.
Well, in the Army, I was a commanding officer 4 times, and it's a tradition in the Army that the CO, the old man, portrays Santa Claus at the unit Christmas party. Mm-hmm. And so I would dress up with a fake beard and, Santa and do the thing. And she saw how much I enjoyed it. And so she kind of lovingly nudged me, said, you should try this. So I interviewed at Busch Gardens, and to my surprise and somewhat horror, they selected me as one of their Santas. So I decided, well, okay, I guess I'm in it now. So I started hanging out in the toy section, learning all the different dolls and toys and stuff. And I speak various languages to differing levels of proficiency. So I learned how to say, what would you like for Christmas, in different languages. So anyway, but about the 3rd day on the throne, I say, oh, this is pretty easy. I ask the kids what they want. They tell me. I say, I'll look into it. I never promise anything because I'll look into it.
I'll take that under advisement.
Yeah, it's great. So the 3rd day, one of my elves comes up to me. She said, Santa, she said, you're about to see 3 kids, and they've been orphaned for the last year. And the foster parents been keeping them, have just been approved to adopt them, which means that they can grow up together. The biggest fear is being separated out in different families. Oh, and they want you to tell them.
Oh, my.
And boom, that's all the warning I got. There they are. So I had no idea what to say. So I went on the old standby. What would you like for Christmas? And they talked. And I can say there was 3 of them. The oldest was a 12-year-old girl, and she didn't believe. He's playing along. The 10-year-old, they really don't believe, but they don't want to blow their chances just in case they're wrong. But the 8-year-old boy, his eyes were enormous. He believed, certainly. And so when they finished, I said, okay, it's great. I'll look into it. Still not knowing what I was going to say next. And then it came to me. It said, but I have something for you today. And they said, what's that, Santa? I said, a family.
How did they react?
Well, first they were a little puzzled. Then I explained what that meant. And there wasn't a dryer in the house after that. And I'd say, that's the moment it quit becoming a job.
Yeah.
Something else. So I say, that's when I became Santa Claus.
Wow. Well, let's bring Mrs. Claus in. Chere, are you there?
I am.
Yay, there she is. Wonderful to see you.
And you too, John.
Thank you. Tell us more about this whole Santa and Mrs. Claus experience.
Well, he wasn't terribly sure about it, but I knew how good it was for him. I saw what it did for him. And I was determined that he should go ahead and do it. Being the old man of the unit, of course, they always put upon you, and the nurses will aid and abet. They'll sew furry trim on various places on the uniform, and they will special order a name tag that doesn't say Colonel Harper, it says Santa. So he had the military equivalent, shall we say, to the robe. And that was just the start of it. Of course, we no longer have that, but I no longer have a guest bedroom either. Instead, we have the Christmas room, and the closet is full of the various robes, from Father Christmas English style on up through Coca-Cola.
Now, and you're doing some writing of your own too, aren't you?
I am. The children relate to me as grandmother. In fact, I've been called Grandma, Oma, and various other iterations of it. And I suddenly realized, okay, they see me as a grandmother, a safe person. And if for some reason this fellow scares them just a tiny little bit, they will approach me with no such problems. And I've taught them how to hug and how to understand that other grown-ups can love them too, besides their parents.
How many kids would you say you both deal with in a season?
It varies every year, but thank goodness for a park employee with a little clicker. And some years it's 75,000 or more.
Oh my.
In a season.
Isn't that draining?
Oh no, they charge our batteries.
Have there been some really, I mean, Brad told about one experience. Are there some really heartbreaking moments as well?
Oh, there definitely are. We see children who are not well or who have just lost a loved one. And sometimes they need to share that with us. And my dress gets washed of tears every now and then.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes just a few, sometimes many.
How do you prepare yourselves? How do you recharge? You know, how does this impact you in that whole experience?
It's just part of life. These are lovely children. And if I am to behave as their grandmother, then I love them.
Yeah.
That's all you can do. And it seems to be sufficient.
Yeah. You take the child wherever they are. You know, take them as they are. Don't put any expectations on them whatsoever, and just accept them as they are. One of the most challenging things that I do is every year I do the Christmas party for the family support group for children on the oncology service at the Children's Hospital, the King's Daughters. And, you know, being a physician, sometimes I can look at one or two of these kids and know it's probably going to be their last Christmas. And then,
yeah.
for a few minutes, they're not a patient. I treat them as a child. I let them be normal for a few minutes, and that's the best gift I can give them.
Yeah. So going into this coming Christmas, who knows what it's going to be like? Is it too soon to know if COVID is going to have an impact on Busch Gardens?
Oh, it certainly will. They opened up on long weekends now, and I'm working 3 days a week at the local health district, and I reviewed their opening plans. And then the day they opened up for a family event as a test run, I was there to kind of look over things, and they've got a pretty good plan. We're doing fairly well in this part of Virginia now. We started off kind of hot, but we're down with pretty good numbers. So I think their plan is reasonable. There's nothing sure about either Hollow Scream or for Christmas Town, But I think if they offered us a job, we could probably do it together since we live together. We could do it without masks on, behind some kind of screen or something. So at least, Santa and Mrs. Claus wouldn't be wearing masks. But I think that's probably the best we could hope for this year. And I'm optimistic about the work on the vaccine. And I'm hopeful that by this time next year, we'll be back to something pretty close to normal once again.
And Chere, you also worked as a contact tracer recently.
Yes, I'm certified, if you will, through our Peninsula Health District, which is part of the Virginia state. And I do this as a volunteer. I'm part of what they call the MRC, or Medical Reserve Corps. And nurses, doctors, retired medical people of all sorts. But our first deployment turned out to be to the Eastern Shore for some difficulties they had at some poultry processing plants. And it was very intense for a period of time. And I made the terrible mistake of letting them know I speak some Spanish. So every one of my clients turned out to be a Spanish speaker. And I learned some new terminology, let me tell you. Didn't have the medical terms before that.
How difficult is it to be a contact tracer? I mean, that's got to be maddening, and just tremendous. You've got to be a detective, really, right?
You really do. And but the very first thing you have to do is establish a rapport and a trust with your client about the fact that you care for their health and that of their family. And that's the only reason you're working with them. And we don't give out home phone numbers. We have a Google Voice system that we use so that there's not a direct contact. We don't go to the houses. Our investigators might need to do that because occasionally you get a bad phone number or something of that sort. So there are multiple levels of contact tracing.
And do you are you able to actually find out how the person may have contracted COVID? Are you able to trace it back and make those determinations?
That part is done before the contact tracer, in my position, goes into action. And we never talk about who the contact was. That is held as private information. And we just move forward with that. If I am given the contact information to call someone, then I'm concerned with who they may further have been in contact with. So it's always moving forward rather than retrograde.
And what kind of reaction do you get from people when you are in these conversations? Are people freaking out? Are they suspicious? Are they just oblivious? How would you summarize or assess the response that people are having?
That's a good description of the range. You see everything. Some people say, "Why are you calling me? How did you get my name?
Mm-hmm.
What is this all about?" And others are at the other extreme. They'll say, "Oh yes, so-and-so at work works next to me and he tested positive 3 days ago. So I thought somebody would call."
What do you say to people who say that this is just a hoax, or that they say that, the media is just looking at the numbers, the numbers of people who are infected, but they're not looking at the numbers of the vast numbers of people who are getting better? Is it a matter of, our emphasis is sort of fear mongering, or is this potentially really a bad thing? How do you respond to the skeptics?
I don't have to worry about that too awfully much, because these individuals have seen a coworker who becomes ill in many cases, and they are all communicating with each other. And the grapevine is still a very powerful tool. So I've not had too much of that kind of conversation going forward.
Well, but you do have this conversation going on with me because I hear from people who say it's a hoax. I hear from people who say that we shouldn't concentrate on all the deaths and the number of people who are testing positive. We should concentrate on the number of people who are getting better.
That could be falsely reassuring. And there are times when a little higher dose of caution is appropriate. And just the fact that this is called a novel coronavirus means it's brand new. We do not know everything about it yet. And unfortunately, we're finding out that things that we don't know can be hugely important to us. And so I think we need to be appropriately cautious, and we need to follow our leadership. And in our particular state, we are very much blessed to have a physician for a governor right now. And
that would be Virginia, right? That's Virginia.
Yeah. Yes. He understands the science and he lets that lead his decisions.
Okay. It's such a controversial thing, isn't it?
Oh, yes, very much.
And it's one of the reasons it's controversial is because, there are some people, some of the thinking is that, there are draconian measures that have been taken that are basically just causing a body blow to the economy, and that it's sort of, we are overreacting to the problem and at the expense of the economy. And, there are others who feel as if, that it is masks, for instance, are an infringement on their personal freedom. And so it's become incredibly polarized. Unnecessarily so, would you say?
Not at all. I would say probably one of our largest problems is the fact that we were slow off the starting block. Had we shut down earlier, tens of thousands of deaths might have been prevented. So having to be draconian, as you say, maybe that's an appropriate word, but there's a time one must do this. And of course, none of us were alive during the time of some earlier pandemics. And so 100 years is a long time. People forget a great deal about what went on. And only if you have records in the family, grandma talking about what happened way back then, or that's how grandpa died because he got drafted and he went to basic training and he caught that flu.
Are you, both of you, optimistic or pessimistic about how this virus is going to play out going forward?
Oh my, that's a difficult one, isn't it?
I'm optimistic. The progress in the vaccine is looking really good, and I think we'll probably have something that will be blessed for use either by the end of this year or early next year. And there's some people say, well, I won't take the virus or I won't take the vaccine. Fine. There's going to be a long line ahead of you, buddy. But by the time we get around to you, you may want to change your mind when you see the impact it has on our society. But I'm not going to worry about right now about who will take the vaccine or who won't. We've been through this before when seatbelts became mandatory. Motorcyclists who feel like they're being infringed have to wear their helmet. To me, this is like arguing about gravity. The virus doesn't care what your political affiliation is. It's going to do what it does best. And one of the interesting articles, I try to keep up with the medical literature, and one of the most interesting articles I read recently was that wearing a mask, obviously it helps reduce the spread because you don't spread your respiratory droplets as far and as wide and as such a quantity. It also does reduce to some extent how much you breathe in. And the study I read was that people who become infected who did not wear a mask, about 15% of them have no symptoms. People who get infected while wearing a mask, 45% do not get symptoms. And we talk about the inoculum effect, the size of how many viral particles are within that initial exposure. If it's a smaller dose, it gives your body more time to react, to respond, to start neutralizing that virus. And so your chance of becoming clinically ill are greatly reduced. So even though it's the right thing to do for those around you to wear a mask, it also has quite a bit of protective effect for yourself as well. And those societies in like Asia, where wearing a mask is no big deal, that's one of the reasons why they've been able to keep it under control much better than we have here in the West, and especially in the United States.
I'd be interested in knowing how the two of you met, because you have been a team for how many years?
Oh, we're going on 48 now.
My goodness. How did you meet?
In junior high school. My mother was the librarian for our junior high, and Chere hurt her back in gym class, so she was one of my mother's assistants in the library. And so we met. I was in the 9th grade and she was in the 8th. And then we were in marching band together in high school and Spanish club together in high school. And so we knew each other for 10 years before we got married. And then we were married 10 years before we had kids. It just takes me a while, but I am proud to say that I delivered both of my own daughters.
Oh my goodness.
Was born the day after I graduated medical school. So my first official act as a physician was to deliver my daughter. And as Chere said, finish what you started.
Chere, I'd be interested from your point of view. Was it love at first sight? Did it really, did it grow gradually? There are a lot of women in my life I talk to who are trying to figure it out. How to discern who Mr. Right is. So what kind of observation and advice do you have from 40 years into the future and looking back? What kind of guidance can you give people who are trying to figure that one out?
Oh, that is pretty easy, actually. I will send out the same advice that I used myself and gave to our 2 daughters when the time came. Look at how he treats his mother. That's how he's going to treat you someday. If he loves and respects her, treats her properly, then you may expect the same from him. And that should at least be a big guide to your decision.
And were there some guys you dated who weren't so nice to their moms?
There was one who didn't make it past the first date.
And how did Brad treat his mom?
Oh, he still treats her like the queen she is.
Nice. So Brad, how was it? In my experience, the guys they fall hard, and so I would imagine that was the way it was for you, or no?
I fell in love with her hair to begin with. She's part Irish, part Cherokee, part Comanche. So she had this very fine silken black hair that it just entranced me. And I was studying, actually, I was taking dance lessons. I was learning how to be a dance instructor. So I would invite her to school dances, and she kept saying, no, thank you, no, thank you. Turned out her parents were a little strict Baptists, and they didn't hold with dancing. And so I figured after about the 3rd time I asked her, she said no, was that she just wanted to be friends. And so we didn't start dating again, or dating, period, until we were both in college, and then she could finally dance.
One of the things I'd like to talk to you about, Chere, for a second is your dad, because I find this fascinating. If anybody ever saw the movie Airport, the Patron character is modeled after your dad. Am I right?
Exactly. The original story was written as the corporate history of American Airlines. And my dad was always such a character that people were always telling stories about him. And one of those stories was how he was on the midnight shift, and when he got into work, all kinds of clatter and ruckus were going on, obviously an emergency. And a snowstorm had started, and at this particular airport, they didn't keep snowplow equipment because it almost never snowed. It was not considered economical. So my dad said, "What's going on?" And they told him that they'd had to close down all but one runway, but there were two planes that still had to get in that didn't have enough fuel to go to another airport of the proper size. So one of them landed, skidded toward the end of the runway, and embedded itself in the bank on the side, sideways, so that one wing was sticking out and the last plane could not land. They were just about to send a snowplow, sort of a thing, like a bulldozer, I guess, to push this plane off and totally destroy it so that the last plane could land safely. And Dad said, "Wait a minute, what aircraft?" He knew every aircraft by their airframe numbers. And when they told him the number, he said, "Stop them. I'll grab a craft and go out there. I can rock that out of the ditch," because it was made with a strong enough strut arrangement to the wheels that could be done. And so that's exactly what he did. And he taxied the aircraft back to the hangar where it could be inspected and cleaned of all the mud and snow and all that, and saved a multi-million-dollar airplane. And in his next paycheck, he got a couple of $100 from American Airlines saying thank you.
How closely was your dad portrayed in the movie Airport?
Very closely in some respects and not in others. My family is not related to Dean Martin, and nor are they related to the supervisor, the manager of that particular airport, which was not Lincoln International. They changed that to make it sound bigger. It was actually Tulsa International, which is the maintenance headquarters for American Airlines. However, my dad did always smoke cigars. And so I made him go to the movie, and oh, did he fuss. He was Louis L'Amour and John Wayne type person. So what do you mean you're going to make me go to this movie about airports? You know, that's my work. That's not my movies, not my reading material. And I said, "Hush, Daddy, you'll see why when it's over." Well, he got very quiet during that movie. And when it was all over, we're coming out, he was grinning ear to ear. And I suppose I was too. And I said, "Daddy, what did you think about the movie?" And he said, "Well, Biddy Brad, what a waste of a good cigar." Because the character was chewing them and never smoked them.
And he was something of a war hero as well during World War II. Am I right?
Yes, he had 5 Purple Hearts, a Silver Star. He jumped into Normandy with 82nd. And one of the things I'm proudest about him is he got promoted to corporal 3 times.
Oh, man. And so now you two have been, have all the tours you've been on, Brad, accompanied tours, so Chere's been able to be with you?
Well, no. Before I went to medical school, I spent a brief time, 18 months in Turkey, in Izmir. And so she came. I knew at that time I wanted to get out when my obligation was up and to try to get into medical school. So she stayed back in Oklahoma, working as a teacher to build up our finances. She came over for the summer. We had quite a time then. I went home for Christmas, but otherwise I was in Turkey by myself. And then, of course, when I deployed to Bosnia, I was down there downrange 10 months, although we got together a couple of times in Budapest, which was really nice. So
see the Army, join the Army, see the world.
Really?
Tell me the story. Tell me the story about the bounty on your head, the $1.5 million bounty.
Oh, okay. So
that.
Yeah. So I was the command surgeon with U.S. Army South, and so I had some missions in Colombia. And once I went down, I actually had 2 jobs. One, my official job, and the other, the real reason I was there. We'd taken a U.S. Army first aid class for non-medics and translated into Spanish. And I had two sergeants who were Mexican Americans, and they were the primary trainers. I speak Spanish well, but not that well. But enough when the generals or colonels would come by, I could explain what we're doing, that sort of thing. But my real reason was we had 3 CIA contractors that were captured by the FARC. And so I was there to do the medical aspect of the planning. We knew where they were, and we were going to do a snatch and grab and get them out. And so I was working with my counterparts, visiting the hospital. We had a psychologist from the CIA who was really good at, helping people, former hostages, how to deal with the reintegrations in society. So I was involved in that. And then 2 days before we were going to do the snatch and grab, the FARC moved them. Well, I am proud to say a couple of years later, when they were rescued, they used the plan that I had written. So it still didn't go to waste. But, working along the border there between Colombia and Venezuela, the FARC, not just me, but members of my team, there was that bounty on our heads. And since I was a colonel, mine was worth a little bit more. But whenever I tell that story, I always make sure that, the offer's expired. It's no longer good. But I had this little card called a blood chit, which I got from the embassy when I first got there. And there were serial numbers in the 4 corners. And in Spanish, it said that I was for the U.S. government. And if I needed assistance, if they would help me, and presented one corner of the card, they would receive some sort of reward from the U.S. government for helping me. And so if I ever needed any help, I tear off a corner, give them to them, got separated, something like that. And so fortunately, I never had to use that. We called it the get out of jail free card. And by the way, the very first blood chit was written by George Washington. There was a French balloonist who came over after Washington was the president, and he was doing a demonstration. And of course, this is when the capital was in Philadelphia. And so he only spoke French. So Washington wrote a letter that the guy carried with him and said, wherever he landed, if you please help this man and his equipment to get back to Philadelphia, we'll give you a cash reward. And the Flying Tigers in World War II, they had that in silk on the inside of their jackets. No, on the outside rather. In Chinese, it said, don't cheat this person. He's on our side. Help him get back to his people. And so I had the blood shit, and I'm thinking about writing a story someday about a character based on my experience, and the title of the book would be Bloodshed.
How would you spell the second word, or how do you spell the word?
CHIT. Chit.
Say it again.
Bloodshed. CHIT.
Right. Okay.
And
whoa, we should probably go back to your writing. I mean, that's really the reason we're talking about it. But whenever I talk to you, it's so easy to talk to Chere too. So and you guys are just such a great team. And I mean, Chere, what's it like to be around this insufferably famous author now?
Oh, he forgets he's so famous. It's not a problem at all.
And what has? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
She makes the cookies.
Well, and let me ask it. I don't think I've ever asked this question to anybody before, but what's it like from the perspective of a person who is living? What's it like to live with a writer?
It makes for a very quiet house. I don't have any problems with noise. And we both like good music to write to. And so it's not a problem.
And would you say that he runs pages past you every now and then? Or is Chere one of your beta readers? Because I've heard that's probably not a good idea to have someone with whom you share a bed or a last name as a person who's going to criticize your work.
No, I am his beta reader.
Yeah, she has no problem telling me if something doesn't work.
Well, and let's Queen's Gambit, which is the book that you won so many awards for. Chere played a part in your research.
Oh, yes, she did.
Oh, yes, the dangers I faced.
My fictional assassination attempts on Queen Victoria during the Diamond Jubilee ceremony. And so we went to London, and And there's a plaque right outside of St. Paul's Cathedral that shows where her carriage sat. She had rheumatism. She was 78 years old. And she said, I'm not going to hobble up the steps into the cathedral in front of, thousands of my loyal subjects. I'm the queen. You'll bring the ceremony out to me. I'm going to sit in the carriage for the whole thing. So I stood right where her carriage sat. And then I looked around and said, if I was a sniper, where would I be? And so I looked down this side street, and there was one window in the corner, 2 stories up. And I said, oh, that would be the perfect place. So we went to the building. Turned out it's now a youth hostel. But at the time of the Diamond Jubilee, it was the boarding school for the boys' choir. So it would have been empty during the ceremony. All the boys, of course, would have been out there on the steps of the cathedral. Well, they were very kind. They let us in. Let's look all around. And whoops, hang on just a second. Off here. So, okay.
Yeah, it's probably the president calling. You sure you don't want to take that?
Yeah. Can you see me?
Yeah. Whoops.
My daughter really wants to talk to me. Bless her heart.
Yeah. This is the fun of live broadcasting.
I'm afraid of clicking something might turn it off. Oh, wait a minute. There we go. Okay, I'm back.
We're back.
Okay, so we went up to the room where that window was. And I love you, Linnea. Not now.
How about I call her on another line?
Yeah, would you do that,
no.
Sheree? Okay.
I'll be back and on.
Okay, so so the window was 6 feet up, or maybe even more above the floor. So Sheree climbed up on the top bunk and took some pictures out the window. And I paced the distance from the wall beneath the window to where her carriage sat. It was 88 paces. And my assassin has an air rifle. So it would have been well within the range of his rifle that I have him use in the book. And so, so she risked her life to climb up that rickety little ladder that an 8-year-old kid would scamper up like a monkey. Put some pictures for me.
So maybe this is a good opportunity for you to read a little bit from, you'd be reading from Knife in the Fog, though, am I correct?
Oh, whichever one you want.
Well, we're talking about Queen's Gambit, so if you want to go there, why don't you read a little bit from there?
Okay. In my first book, I had Arthur Conan Doyle, Professor Bell, the real-life inspiration for Sherlock Holmes, a professor of surgery that Doyle had, and then Margaret Harkness. And Margaret was a real person. She was an author and a suffragette, and she was living in Whitechapel during the Ripper murders. And so this is the 4th chapter of the second book, and this is where I kind of set the hook or the premise, if you will, for what launches Margaret on this adventure. So this is the office of the German Reichskanzler, Berlin, Friday, May the 21st, 1907. Chlodwig Karl Victor, Prince of Hohenlohe, Prime Minister of Prussia and Chancellor of Germany, was glaring. The 2 men sitting opposite him at the small table looked down at their hands, trying their best to avoid the heat of the Chancellor's glare. Explain to me, gentlemen, he said, his slow, exact speech mimicking the tone one would use with a dull child, how our agents can plan an operation for months, only to find the nest of traitors empty. 3 times now we have had good intelligence on the location of these anarchists, only to find they have slipped the net. Is there a spy in our midst? Oberst Colonel Adler, head of the security service, twisted his hat in his hand. He looked out the window at a passing bird before he replied, I've studied the logs of all who were present for meetings concerning the operations, and the only person involved in every case was, he looked down, twisting his hat more viciously, me. The Chancellor snorted, then you are either the worst double spy in history or the cleverest, to hide yourself in plain sight. What other explanation is there? Adler spread his hands before him. I have none, mein Herr. Coincidence is most unlikely. Somehow they're getting intelligence from my office, but are too clumsy to hide the fact effectively. Herr Schork, the Chancellor's private secretary, had kept silent until now. He cleared his throat. The 2 older gentlemen looked at him as though the furniture had just spoken. Gentlemen, I have a proposal, if I may. His superior looked down his nose but nodded. Very well. A new idea would be welcome. I think we need someone from outside to look for our spy, someone who would not be known within our usual circles and could be discreet. But also someone we could trust, Adler added. Where could you find such a person? The Chancellor interrupted. Herr Oberst, since you are a suspect, I request you leave the room before Schork and I continue this conversation. If you know the identity of our consultant, the findings would be suspect if you are clear. Adler's jaw tightened as he glared at Schork. There we go. Okay, as he glared at Schork. I'm going to close this. Something popped up. Okay. Yes. And left the room as quickly as his dignity allowed. Once the breeze from the security chief's departure subsided, the Chancellor looked at Schork with new respect. You know, of course, once this matter is settled, it is unlikely you can ever work with Adler again. Not to worry. If you can resolve this matter to my satisfaction, you will find yourself promoted. Of course, if you do not, you have made a bitter enemy of Adler with no profit to show for it. Now, the name of this remarkable individual? Schork swallowed as the implication of the Chancellor's words, then said, You're aware, I believe, of the fictional character Sherlock Holmes? The Prince of Hohenlohe slammed the table before replying, You want to employ a make-believe detective? No, sir, Schork stuttered. But the man who inspired the character is very real. He has helped the police in more than one case. I suggest we call in Professor Joseph Bell, the real Sherlock Holmes.
Mm-hmm. And the first novel deals with Sherlock Holmes as well, and you mixed it with the Jack the Ripper murders. How did that idea come about?
Well, after I retired from the Army, we traveled a lot. After about 15 months, I said, this is fun, but I don't want to spend the rest of my life on a buffet line on a cruise ship, although it may look like it. So I was always a huge fan of Sherlock Holmes. The summer I turned 13, I read the entire canon of Holmes stories in one enormous gulp, you might say 6 weeks. And I cried when the last one was done because there were no more. And in 1973, when I was in college, the 7% Solution came out by Nicholas Meyer, and I was just astounded that anyone else could write a Sherlock Holmes story. So I filed that away. That's good to know. And then after I retired, one day I was reading about Holmes, or Doyle rather, and I saw that his first book, Study in Scarlet, he wrote it in 1886, and no one would touch the thing. After about 6 months, finally one editor said, okay, I'll give you £25, but you have to give me full copyright. Well, Doyle wrote stories for boys' magazines, short stories, and he would get more than that for, a story, a third the length, and keep the copyright. So after so many months, he could resell it to an anthology or something. So he was so sick of the story by that time. He said, fine, take it. He took his £25 and said he would never write another crime story the rest of his life. So in 1888, of course, over 13 weeks or so, the Ripper does his thing. And then in 1890, Doyle was convinced or persuaded to come back and write some more Holmes stories. So the Ripper story was right in the middle of that sweet spot of 4 years, basically, between the first and the second story. So I thought of writing a story that would involve Doyle in the hunt for Jack the Ripper, which would explain why the Ripper stopped as suddenly as he started without ever knowingly being caught, and why Doyle eventually returned to writing Sherlock Holmes. So that idea just began growing in my mind, and I said, well, okay, how would that happen? And so I started writing down some ideas, and it just began to grow, and it wouldn't leave me alone. So I finally decided, okay, I'll write the story, and the worst thing that'll happen is my grammar will get better, and my grammar has gotten better. And I wrote the story, and then I met you, and you helped me make it better. And
well, and I can remember some of the notes that I wrote to you. I edited that first novel, and I found myself giving you notes in the Holmes voice because the way you were writing, it was embedded in me. So I just tried to give you notes that were in sort of the same rhythm. It's insidious how it gets inside you that way. And tell me how your background in pathology helped you write the novel.
Well, I've done about 20 forensic death investigations while I was in the Army. So, and I've my medical school. I went to the military medical school in Bethesda, and we had a lot of training about the history of medicine, which I find fascinating. And so I was able to study the forensic techniques at the time of investigating Jack the Ripper. That was the first murders, in fact, that the Metropolitan Police used to take pictures of the victims to create records that they could go back and study later on. And so I talk about that. There was no standardization at that point. They used commercial photographers because the police didn't have their own photographers or their own cameras. There were no fingerprints. The bodies were washed before they were examined. The clothing was thrown away, so it wasn't examined. A number of mistakes were made early on that the police, some of the police knew better, and some of them didn't. There were still, forensic science was still in its infancy. And so I was able to bring out some of the challenges that the police had. And one of the challenges, in fact, was, I didn't know this until I did my research, there's actually two police forces within London. There's the City of London Police, which is in the very center in the financial district, and there's the Metropolitan, which covers everything else. And there's a huge rivalry between the two of them in my story and in real life as well. One retired cop, in fact, told me that one of the things he liked most about the story was how I bring out the friction between the two police departments and how much they battled each other. He said that's very realistic.
So do you have a hunch as to who the real Jack the Ripper is? I mean, do you reveal? I mean, I know I don't want to give it away, and I don't think that the actual person who you reveal as Jack Ripper in your book, I don't think that is who was even a suspect. So do you have a sense of who the Ripper was?
There was a Polish artist that has been suspected. He was put in a state asylum shortly after the last murder, and the murder stopped. And there was one scarf that was found at the site of the fourth victim, and some studies since then comparing some DNA that was found on the scarf with some of the man's ancestors highly suggest that he probably was Jack the Ripper. As for me, I found that there are people who are really invested in their particular suspect. And so in my story, my Ripper is fictional because I quickly realized if I didn't choose their particular Ripper, then they'd be mad at me. So exactly. I say, well, it very well could have been this person, but I also say that, mysteries sell books. And so you can choose whatever suspect that you want.
Well, and the one you're working on now involves the Titanic, and I can't wait to read that one. Tell us a little bit about that. How's that one coming?
Again, I try to blend real people, real events with a touch of fiction. The best compliment someone could give me after they read one of my stories is, it could have happened like that. So in this particular story, I have a gang of female thieves, and there was an actual gang. They were called the 40 Elephants because they operated out of a pub called the Elephant and Castle, which I recently learned was a British Englishization of the title of one of the early queens of England. She was from Spain, and she was called the Elefante de Castillo, so the Elephant and Castle. There you go. So they existed from 1785 to around 1950s. And so at the time of the Titanic in 1912, there was a woman named Alice Diamond. Alice Diamond was about 5'8" when most men were 5'6", and she could portray a very elegant lady of the upper class, and she could also knock a man down with one punch. So she's there with her lover, and then another young lady from the gang. I have Margaret Harkness. She's been hired as a reserve Pinkerton agent, and the word out in the street is that there'll be some thieves or a con artist or whatever on board the Titanic to try to fleece the wealthy passengers. And some of the richest people in the world were on this maiden voyage. And so the White Star Line at the last minute hires Pinkerton to put a couple of agents on board. So Margaret supervised an agent, was also a real person. His name was Harry Worth, and Harry Worth was the son of Adam Worth. And Adam Worth was the real-life inspiration for Professor Moriarty. Mr. Worth, the elder, Later in life, he had stolen a painting many years before, and the Pinkertons constantly hounded him. So towards the end of his life, he was in poor health. So he cut a deal with Alan Pinkerton. He said, "Look, I'll let you take the painting back for $25,000, which is about 10% of what it was worth, under three conditions: the price, he would not be prosecuted, and when his son became of age, he'd allow him to become a Pinkerton agent, because he didn't want his son to follow in his footsteps in a life of crime." So Harry will be the agent supervising Margaret on this battle of wits, if you will. And the prize was a painting of a Circassian woman leaving a Roman bath that was life-size by Blondel, and it was aboard the ship. And so the thieves are trying to steal this painting under the noses of the Pinkertons. And that's the background. And of course, then an iceberg intervenes and change of
the
plan.
rest is history. Yeah. Are you having fun writing it?
Oh, very much so. The research is daunting. There's an awful lot about the Titanic. Just the fashion, women's fashion of the Edwardian era is interesting, because Queen Victoria didn't really care for much formal dress. And so during her time, the fashion was rather, I won't say Puritan, but subdued. And once King Edward took over, wow, Katie barred the door. And so the fashion got rather extreme there for a while.
And Hollywood is involved at this point with Knife in the Fog? Is there interest? What's going on there? Are we going to see this as a TV series?
Well, hopefully so. There's a TV screenwriter who's written for a couple of well-known shows, and he's fallen in love with the book. He's written a treatment, and so this past week, his manager started circulating it amongst he said he was going to target 30 producers who have ties to various studios, and also the approaching some bankable actors and their agents to try to get some interest there. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah. I mean, Hollywood is fickle that way, right?
Yeah, Amazon and all those streaming services are sitting on a pile of money, and they're looking for fresh content, and I'm more than willing to help them with that problem.
Exactly. So how can people get a hold of you, get a hold of your books? I've got your website up there, bharperauthor.com. Is that the best way to reach you and get your books?
It certainly is. They could leave messages there. I have a young lady from Canada who manages that for me, and she forwards any personal messages to me. And I also have a Facebook page, B. Harper Author, and people can certainly connect with me that way as well.
And give a shout out to your agent as well.
Oh yes. Well, Jill.
Yeah. You can't let the agent go there, man.
Oh, Jill is with the Sandra Dykstra agency, and they've been wonderful to me.
Jill Marr.
Yeah, the first book, she got me a contract with a Japanese publisher, so the first book is in Japanese. She got me audiobook contracts for both the books. And the first book won the Earphone Award on AudioFile magazine for the best mystery and suspense of 2019. And of course, it was through my agency, my little agency, that the screenwriter contacted us and began this latest adventure. So we'll see what happens. But Jill has been really just instrumental to my success.
Yeah, Jill Marr. What's the name of her agency?
I'm sorry, the Sandra Dykstra agency, and
Okay.
Dykstra is DIJKSTRA.
Okay. Well, this has been wonderful talking to you two, and it was serendipitous that we met, and that we've been able to stay in touch over these years. And I'm thrilled at the accolades that you're getting. Not surprised, but thrilled. And so, to both of you, Chere and Brad, it's just been a treat and a pleasure, and to be continued.
Thank you very much. We didn't even talk about Edinburgh.
Oh, that's right. Well, we have a second or two. Tell me about Edinburgh. I forgot to ask that.
All right. I've just been accepted into a Masters of Arts program, actually MFA through Seton Hill, but there's a one-year option in Edinburgh, Scotland. So this time next year, I'll be preparing to move to Edinburgh for 1 year to get a Masters of Arts and Creative Writing from Napier University. The first half will be working on a novel. The second, I have to write a 30-minute screenplay. And I've already got the idea for that. I have a short story I've written about a kidnapping, which I think would make a nice screenplay.
Jeez. How many more books do you think you have in you?
Well, there's about 5 in the back of my head that I'd be happy to write, which I could probably start on today if I ever get that darn Titanic down to the bottom where it belongs.
When do you think you'll be done with the Titanic book?
My goal is to have a solid draft before I go to Napier next year, so that it can be my project for the first semester, and then have it ready to pitch, so I can then focus on the screenplay of the second semester.
It's fun being you, isn't it?
It's fun being her husband.
This has been great. Thank you both, Chere Harper and Brad Harper. I'm sure we're going to hear a lot more from both of you as time goes on. Take care, guys. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. It was a